And he did 4 of us in the space of a week. One of them was 63. He died in the hospital. He never left the hospital after the operation. I was the next one in. There was one other guy that was a year or two older than me, and then it was me. I was 37, and then the youngest one was 28, and the 28-year-old one was the only one that smoked, and he wouldn't quit smoking. And he died. He's since died, but the old man died in the hospital. Then the 28-year-old died, outside, and then the other one was 40-something, and I was 37. And we kept in touch for 2 or 3 years, and then he just disappeared. I don't know whatever happened to him. So anyway, they quit doing those things because they were just too radical. It was an operation that was perfected at Massachusetts General Hospital on the East Coast, and they did 350 of them and then stopped doing them because they were just too radical. And back in those days, 50% of the operations failed. The patient died.
Wow.
But my stomach, for instance, was only about the size of a little 6-ounce cheese glass. That's what they made a pouch for me. And now it's about the size, a little bit bigger than a pint bottle, like that thing he's got with that coffee cup Jack's got over there. So, anyway.
Yeah. What did your father do in Italy for a living?
Farmhand, I guess. I mean, it wasn't a manufacturing country, So I guess they lived on a farm. They here when we were kids, every family had a garden. Every family had a sheep or a goat or a cow in the backyard. They all had chickens. If you wanted a potato, you went out and dug it out of your yard. Mm-hmm. They didn't have welfare like you got nowadays, But Dad worked for what is now PG&E back in the days when it was Western Electric. All the ditches back in the 1920s, were dug by hand. And there was ditches on A Street that watched by Father in there digging that he was 6 feet tall and you couldn't see his head when he was down in that damn ditch with a pick and shovel. They'd get down there and they'd take the shovel and toss it up over on the bank. I remember when they put the gas lines through there on Weber Avenue and A Street, where when they built the Richmond Chase Cannery back in 1920 something, they didn't have any pavement there on A Street, and my dad, along with other property owners, had to sign up for it. That Mr. Johnson, who was the manager of the cannery, come around and he had come over and got my dad to sign. They had to sign that they'd let him pave that pavement there, And he said, "I'll give you enough work so you can pay for this," because I remember that Dad put it on the tax bill for 10 years to pay for the pavement, So anyway, then when Dad got to where he couldn't work at the PG&E laid him, or the Western Electric laid off everybody when he got the dishes all done. He got himself a little wagon that had screens on the sides, and he went around selling. Built himself a vegetable route. That was the last work that my father did. He built himself a vegetable route out there in Fair Oaks, in Stockton. And he'd go down to market in the morning, and he'd get that wagon loaded with vegetables and stuff, and he'd go out and sell it to these housewives, and that's how we lived. And my mother used to do cooking and stuff like that, for the people at the cannery. And she and your mother was quite young then, and she helped. And Mother used to have there on Weber Avenue, those two rooms that were on the south end of the building. She set up a table in there, and she used to serve meals at noontime for people from the cannery, the permanent hands. And she charged them 35 cents for they come in and eat what they wanted. It was all put on the table, family style. And for 35 cents, they got to eat a meal. And we all worked in the kitchen, Sam and I, and I did a lot of cooking. And Tony was the pie maker. He was the only one that he'd make pies. He used to get the best pie crust you ever ate in your life, and he used to use ice water to mix the flour with. But I never was a pastry eater, so I'm still not. I mean, I eat pie and cake now. I've eaten more since I've been married to her than I ever did before. And I've drank more milk since I've been married to her. But, so anyway,
Did he ever talk about why they decided to come to America?
living standards, you know, that those of them that could find work here had plenty. On the East Coast, there was plenty of work. There wasn't very much in California. You know, there was a little bit later on. I was going to say your mother, but not your mother. But Ange went to work at Del Monte Cannery when she was 10 years old. I can remember her coming home. She had on those aprons, those blue aprons they used to wear. 10 years old, and she was quite chubby. You know, she always was heavy. And she used to walk to Manteca from Lathrop, and then walk back. And I remember how proud she was when they never go to wrote them checks. They put their money in an envelope and pay them in cash. And I remember how proud she was when she'd hand my father this envelope with what, maybe a couple of dollars in it or something. That anyway, and then in 1918, actually 1917, when this country got into World War I, my dad was called up, or John was called up, I guess. John was 17 at the time, and he got called up to register. So he and Dad went down to the courthouse to register, and my dad said, if you take him, you got to take me too. So Dad registered, and he wasn't a citizen. They handed him citizenship papers. When he registered for the draft, they handed him citizenship papers. John the same way. And because John was born in Italy, and he was never an American citizen until 1917 when they handed him the papers. But neither one of them had to go or got in. And then during World War II, your Uncle Sam was one of the few people in the United States that had a deferment signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. One of the few people. And there was just, I don't know, very few of them that got that. But he and his wife had separated, and she took off with somebody else and left him there with the two kids. And when he went to court, well, she never even showed up.
That was Henrietta?
Yeah. And so he had the two kids and everything, and when his name came up for the draft, somebody, it wasn't me, I mean, it wasn't Sam, somebody else, and he got this thing signed by the President of the United States that it deferred for military service. And then I was working in a machine shop for your Uncle Gordo. He was the foreman in the shop, or the assistant foreman, and I was working for him, under him. And they were a bunch of Mormons, and they got deferments for all of their people, you know, that were machinists. I never applied for one, but I never got called up for service until about a couple of months before they dropped the bomb over there. And Gordo and I went up, took our physicals the same day. And he was going to get drafted, and he joined the Marines. They wouldn't take me because I was too old. I got a 4A something or other. And I still got it around here somewhere. But I was too old, so I never got to go either. But Gordo didn't. He spent 5 years over there in the Army of Occupation in Japan.
Yeah, Marines.
Huh?
He was in the Marines.
Yeah.
Great.
One of the people that I don't recall ever meeting was Aunt Ange's husband.
Oh no. I don't remember when he died, but he was a very young man when he died. He's only 41 or 2 years old. He'd been dead a long, long time.
Kenneth was born after he passed away, right? Kenneth was born after he passed away?
I'm almost sure, yeah. Matter of fact, where he's buried is right across as the road goes through the cemetery. My dad's buried here, and Paul was buried right here. Paul died of a stroke. He was in bed with a flu or something or other, and Ange said that he started to get up, and he was rolled over his bed, and he fell down on the floor, and he died that day.
Now, what cemetery is your dad buried in?
in the San Joaquin Cemetery on Harding Way, the Catholic cemetery. My mother's buried. When Mother died in 1955, John and Tony and Millie and I went out there looking for a place to bury her. So they gave us a list of spots that were available. So John said, Millie's the only stranger here, let her pick the spot. So she picked a spot under an oak tree. And that's where then they cut the oak tree down.
And she's in the same cemetery as?
Yeah. Yeah, the whole family is. John's buried there, Anna's buried there. Sam is in Modesto, I believe.
Right, well, in, not Houston, no, where's that cemetery where?
At Finch Camp?
Huh?
At Finch Camp where Mike and...
No, this is out of, it's out of Modesto,
Yeah.
seems to me it's Houston.
Was it serious? No.
Yeah,
And,
one of those in there. But it's outside of the city, Modesto.
Your brother is in Finch Camp, isn't he?
Right,
Okay.
yeah, at Parkview.
Yeah. What did you do with your mother? Did you bury her or cremate her?
She cremated.
Cremated, her ashes were supposedly scattered over Hope Valley, above Highway 88.
Dad's ashes we put in at Silver Lake, and he said he'd catch up with her down the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, where did your mom and dad get married?
When?
Where? Yeah, when in
In Cosenza, Italy, I believe.
Yeah.
In 99, 98 or 99.
Do you know anything about your grandparents?
Nothing. Except that Dad's mother lived to be 105 years old. I never heard a word from anybody about my grandfather. One of Dad's brothers died in an accident. He'd gone up to cut a top of a tree off. He was up there hanging on this tree, and when he cut it off, the thing broke and the thing came down, went right through his body. And that was all I ever heard. I mean, now Uncle Pete and Uncle Tom came to this country along with my dad, and Uncle Pete, his kids developed a special type of brick or something, and they had the brick in Glasgow, New York. Glasgow, New York was an Italian town, you know, and I assume it's still there. But Mother, when we were in Lathrop, like for instance, when I was an infant child, the young bucks would come over from Italy, young men, you know, come and migrate to this country to find jobs. When they came, they migrated to California. When they come to California, they'd come to Lathrop, and they'd live with us while they were finding work, getting established. And Mother was running kind of a boarding house. And that's what her sister-in-law was doing, Uncle Tom's wife. And Uncle Tom's wife had more business than my mother did. And so she had two sons and 2 daughters, his aunt did. And Mike was the one with the no shoulder blade in his arm, you know, the one that, and he was the guy that died, was postmaster there in Lathrop. And he was the one that John and he were going to school. They grew up together, and they were always, you know, like brothers more than cousins. And the principal got on to Mike about something, and the guy John told him to lay off, you know. And he didn't ask him if he wanted something, and John says, okay, let's go to it. And John beat the hell out of the principal, and he got fired. So, anyhow, but they had a brickyard there in Manteca, you know. They used to wheel these bricks in those big kilns, you know, to dry them. They'd make the bricks, and then they'd put them in and dry them. And John did that for several years. I remember when I was a young teenager that John used to do that. They were making big money because they worked piecework. Big money for those days. And John had got the gambling habit that get his paycheck and he'd go into this Chinese place downtown Stockton, down there I guess it was over on, where are those gambling places?
Oh, they've been gone for years, but there was a Chinese section of
Yeah, you go
old
in there, you
stock
mark
and-
lottery tickets and all that kind of jazz. It was, anyway, John used to go in and he'd sit there gambling until he'd lose his check and then he'd come home.
He and Anna never had any children.
No, she had,
She had one.
3 that I know of, 2 sons and a daughter, that John had a hand in raising, finishing their raising. A couple of them were teenagers when he and Man got married. Because Anna was 10, 15 years older than John was. And, anyway,
Your mother's maiden name was what?
my mother's maiden name was Miniachi.
Miniachi.
Yeah. You may remember the little grocery store was on the corner of B and Lafayette Street, there on the front of the house. The railroad track used to run down B Street there, go out to the ice house from downtown Stockton. And the streetcar used to run right, well, that was my uncle's, but that was Mama's youngest brother. He was named Frank Miniachi, and he lived to be 96. Mama's family, most of them died relatively young. Her brother, Emma, I don't know if you knew Emma, married Art Marotti.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, her dad died at age 35. And that was when I was just a kid. And
So Emma was a Miniachi.
yes, she
Married
was
Art.
my Uncle Frank Miniachi's niece. She was my mother's niece.
Okay.
But my mother, she always called my mother Mama, because her mother died in her 20s, and her father died he was in his 30s, and she had a kid brother that died as 8 or 9 years old or something, and so they all died of TB or something like that, or lung disease. So, but then Mama had a brother named Louis that had 9 kids or 10 kids or something. They were all girls except one boy, Jimmy, and he wound up owning the Coranda machine shop there in Stockton. And he and I were about the same age. He was a couple of years older than I was. But anyway, somehow he went to work in that machine shop. And I was told this, I don't know it for a fact. He never said it. Somebody else told me that the guy that owned it was a man and woman named Coranda. And they didn't have any kids of their own, and they liked Jimmy, and he worked, became a skilled machinist. And when the old man died, he left him that machine, or let him buy it or something. So I don't know whether any of them are still alive or not. I haven't seen or heard from many of them for 50 years, I guess.
What caused you to move to Southern California?
I got called up for the draft, for one thing. And I called your grandfather, and I said, can Millie come down there and stay with you while I go into service? I figured I was going to go. And he said, sure, any of the kids want to come in, the house is still here. And he said they can stay here. So we went down there. And while I was waiting for my paperwork to be sent down by the draft board, why Gordo said one day, I got a new lady in, you want to come down there and run it for me while you're waiting? I said, well, I'm going crazy doing nothing here, so I went in, and that's where I spent the war. There were Mormons that owned the shop, and of course they contacted, if you were doing some kind of a special job, why, they'd contact your draft board and they'd tell them, we want this guy, deferred. I never asked for the deferment myself, but I got him up until a couple of months before the war ended. And then they called us up, and Gordon and I got our notice the same day. We went down for our physicals the same day. And we both passed them. But I was too old, so I got a 4A something. Still got it around here someplace.
And Aunt Millie worked for Northrop?
Yes, she worked for Northrop for 10 or 12 years, or 12 years, I guess.
And what did she do for them?
She was in charge of one branch of the finance division, in the timekeeping department. She had a pretty good job for a woman, but Northrop had a policy at that time that they would not make a woman supervisor. So Millie trained her supervisors. She trained them on the job, and then they'd be her boss. And then when she quit, they messed against her out of her retirement. She was supposed to get, I don't know, a couple of $100 a month pension. She never got a penny of it. And I wanted her to go to court and go over it, and she wouldn't do it. I said, get yourself a lawyer.
Then you got this mule.
Yeah.
Turn that other light on. There's noise over on the wall. The first switch. There you go.
Yeah, with this angle, it's picking up more of the backlight.
You want me to turn that light off, Larry, in the breakfast room or the dining room?
That's get a little of both, depending on.
Oh, yeah. That's what I
Yeah,
decided.
she applied to the Indian reservation.